Why would Canada even think about choosing a fighter jet that is not American, especially when its closest ally is the United States? For decades, Canada and the US have shared air defense, military planning, and technology through NORAD. So when reports surfaced that Canada was seriously looking at a European jet, it raised eyebrows in Washington. This is not just about speed or firepower, but about cost, control, software access, and long-term independence. Some critics argue one jet locks Canada into US systems for decades, while the other offers more flexibility at a lower price. Others point out that this choice could quietly affect how Canada and the US work together in future conflicts. Behind closed doors, officials are debating issues that rarely make headlines but could shape North American defense for years. Stay tuned as we break down the Canada versus USA fighter jet debate and explain Gripen versus F-35 in simple terms. Historical roots of Canada's fighter replacement program. The story of Canada's fighter replacement is not a single decision made at one point in time. It is a sequence of policy choices, industrial strategies, parliamentary fights and program resets that together explain why the question of Gripen versus F-35 has become more than a debate about avionics and engine thrust. To understand why Ottawa repeatedly returned to the same dilemma, you must follow a chain that begins with the CF-18 acquisition in the early 1980s, moves through Canada's entry into the Joint Strike Fighter program, and then follows a decade-long domestic political controversy that forced repeated resets and created the institutional conditions for the present contest. Canada selected the FA-18 as its standard fighter in 1980 under the New Fighter Aircraft project. The result was the CF-188, commonly called the CF-18, with first deliveries to the Canadian Forces starting in 1982 and production running through the 1980s. The CF-18 served as Canada's multi-role fighter for 3 decades, supporting NATO deployments in Europe and NORAD air patrols over the Arctic and continental North America. That original decision set a baseline. Canada would rely on a US-origin fighter with established sustainment channels in North America, and that path framed later arguments about interoperability and supply chains. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, the CF-18 fleet was aging, and the Canadian government moved to participate in a multinational process that promised a next-generation solution. Canada joined the Joint Strike Fighter program in its early phases and then formally committed as a partner in the system development and demonstration phase in the early 2000s, making Canada an international JSF participant and opening the door for Canadian firms to bid on JSF supply chain work. The rationale from government and industry was straightforward. Participation would provide influence over design trades and access to high-value industrial work for Canadian aerospace companies. That posture also created an expectation among some officials and industry actors that Canada's future fighter choice would be at least heavily informed, if not effectively decided, by the JSF partnership. The procurement path hardened into political conflict in 2010. On the 16th of July 2010, the Conservative government announced an intent to procure F-35 aircraft as the CF-18 replacement. Initial public comments suggested a sole-source purchase of 65 aircraft. The announcement triggered an immediate domestic backlash. Critics in Parliament and the media questioned why a single supplier had been chosen without a transparent competition, and they flagged cost, operational fit for Canada's northern environment, and the wisdom of locking long-term Canadian defence capability into a US-dominated program. Defence Minister Peter MacKay and other senior officials repeatedly shifted public framing in the months that followed. An early sign that procurement was evolving into a political as well as a technical question. That political pressure produced formal scrutiny. The Auditor General examined how national defence and other departments handled the decision to procure F-35s and tabled a critical performance audit in April 2012. The Auditor General concluded that key procurement steps had been taken out of sequence, that required approvals and documents were missing, and that cost and risk had been understated by officials recommending the F-35. The audit's findings turned what had been a technical contract dispute into a high-profile governance crisis. The federal procurement apparatus had failed its own rules on a file that carried multi-decadal budgetary implications. The audit was soon followed by an independent cost review. In December 2012, a KPMG report, commissioned to bring more rigour to life-cycle costing, produced an estimate that shocked many in Ottawa. Cradle-to-grave ownership costs projected over 4 decades were far higher than the flyaway price figures the government had used in 2010. The KPMG numbers, widely reported in Canadian media, made clear that acquisition cost was only part of the picture. Sustainment, training, infrastructure and upgrades would dominate lifetime obligations. That analysis fed public and parliamentary pressure to reset the process and hold a genuine competition rather than a direct purchase. The practical result of the Auditor General and KPMG episodes was a formal programmatic pause and reorganisation. Ottawa opened the door to competitors and announced an inclusive competition in the years after 2012. That competitive framework did not immediately produce a decision. Procurement timelines stretched, life extension work on the CF-18 fleet grew, and the debate shifted from an early focus on price to a more layered discussion about industrial offsets, sovereign access to software and data, and operational suitability for Canada's geography. The life of the CF-18 was extended repeatedly through modernisation programs and sustainment contracts so the Air Force could meet NATO and NORAD tasks while a permanent replacement strategy matured. Practical lifeline measures, update packages, and a Hornet extension project kept fighters flying into the 2020s and delayed the urgent Day 1 replacement question. Political change in Ottawa also reshaped the procurement architecture. The Liberal government elected in 2015 campaigned on the promise of an open competition and, initially, a distancing from the F-35 political baggage. In November 2016, the government announced it would launch an open, transparent competition to replace the CF-18 fleet, and in 2017, Ottawa published the defence policy, Strong, Secure, Engaged, which formally committed to acquiring 88 new advanced fighters through what became the Future Fighter Capability Project, or FFCP. That policy language created a specific requirement set, including economic benefits to Canadian industry and a public procurement process that would determine which bidders could meet Ottawa's combination of operational, economic, and legal objectives. Between 2017 and the decision window that followed, two dynamics converged. First, the industrial policy dimension became central. Ottawa insisted that the procurement produce measurable industrial and technological benefits for Canadian firms, invoking the government's industrial and technological benefits policy and a value proposition approach that required bidders to promise offset activity in Canada equal to a contractual target. That requirement shifted the arithmetic for non-US competitors. If industrial return and local assembly mattered politically, non-US suppliers could potentially offer greater domestic economic impact than a straight purchase of American aircraft. Second, operational and strategic arguments for interoperability with the United States, particularly within NORAD and for joint missions on the North American continent, kept the F-35 on the shortlist because the aircraft had become the standard for a growing number of US and Allied squadrons. The tension between industrial autonomy and interoperability framed the choice in new terms. This decision was not just about radar range or engine maintenance intervals, it was about Canada's position inside North American defence networks. Into that policy frame entered Saab and its Gripen E campaign. Saab formally submitted a Gripen proposal for Canada's FFCP, offering a package that emphasised in-country assembly, technology transfer, and lower operational cost compared with fifth-generation alternatives. Saab's pitch explicitly tried to convert Ottawa's industrial policy leverage into a national aviation industrial base anchored by Gripen sustainment and upgrades in Canada. The offer forced Ottawa and defence planners to evaluate an alternative model in which the aircraft itself was not only an operational tool, but also the seed for domestic aerospace capacity. Saab's submission further complicated the debate because it raised questions about whether Canada should adopt a mixed approach, preserving some level of interoperability with allies while building sovereign industrial capability. That set of choices, legacy fleet management, entry into a multinational development program, a public procurement crisis, life extension work on existing fighters, and competing industrial offers from foreign suppliers, is the context in which Gripen versus F-35 must be read. The dispute is not a single technical comparison. It is the outcome of decades of institutional decisions about how Canada buys major defence equipment, how Ottawa balances industrial policy against alliance interoperability, and how political actors respond when large capital programs reach the media and the Hill. The program resets of 2012 and the move to an open FFCP competition in 2017 were defining inflection points. They converted a single procurement question into a recurring national argument about sovereignty, economic return, and continental defence. Those institutional roots explain why, by the time ministers and defence officials reached the final rounds of evaluation in the early 2020s, the debate looked as much like a test of Ottawa's procurement and industrial policy tools as it did like a standard fighter selection exercise. The historic pattern of intermittent sole sourcing announcements, followed by audits, followed by competition resets, created a procurement environment in which suppliers pitched technical performance and industrial strategy in equal measure. Any account that starts with cost per aircraft or radar band alone misses the reason the issue keeps returning to Ottawa's agenda. This is a program shaped by past procurement mistakes, by an extended CF-18 life cycle, and by a political requirement to convert military buys into domestic economic outcomes. The Gripen F-35 choice therefore sits at the intersection of defence capability choice and a national debate about how Canada manages strategic procurement. Technical and operational profiles: F-35 versus Saab Gripen. The technical contrast between the Lockheed Martin F-35 Lightning II and the Saab JAS-39 Gripen E is a study in different design priorities. One aircraft is built around a cluster of sensors, stealth and networked operations as a single integrated combat system. The other pursues agility, low operating cost, rapid basing, and national industrial access while adopting many modern sensor and electronic warfare elements. To make the comparison useful for a policy and political audience, the focus here is on concrete, verifiable performance features, propulsion and airframe architecture, sensors and situational awareness, weapons carriage and mission roles, sustainment and life cycle cost drivers, and practical suitability for Canadian missions such as Arctic Air Patrol and continental intercepts. The F-35 is a true fifth-generation design. Its Pratt & Whitney F-135 engine puts the aircraft in the 70,000-pound class, with a top speed of roughly Mach 1.6 and a combat radius that the program lists at about 590 nautical miles, or 1,093 kilometers, on internal fuel for the conventional takeoff and landing variant. What distinguishes the F-35 is not simply these raw numbers, but how they combine with a stealthy airframe and internal weapons bays so that the jet can penetrate modern integrated air defense systems with a much lower radar cross-section when compared to externally laden fourth-generation fighters. The aircraft's AN/APG-81A ESA radar, embedded electronic warfare capability, and advanced data links are intended to make the jet both a sensor node and a shooter. It gathers, fuses, and shares information with other platforms in a way earlier fighters were not designed to do. The F-35 also carries a distributed aperture system called AN/AAQ-37 that gives automatic, spherical infrared coverage and missile approach warning, an unusual combination of long-range radar, passive infrared coverage, and sensor fusion presented directly to the pilot through the helmet display. These are foundational technical traits that shape how air forces think about mission design and force architecture with the F-35. Saab's Gripen E, by contrast, is a modernized 4.5 generation fighter that packages advanced avionics into a deliberately light and serviceable airframe. The Gripen E uses the General Electric F414G engine and carries an AESA radar and an integrated electronic warfare suite plus an IRST infrared search and track sensor. Unlike a purpose-built stealth airframe, the Gripen accepts external stores, up to 10 hardpoints, while keeping an emphasis on low operating cost, rapid turnarounds, and dispersed operations from austere runways. The Gripen E's updated mission systems give it modern, sensor-rich capabilities, but the aircraft's survivability concept relies more on electronic attack, agility, and tactics than on low observable shaping. Saab has repeatedly framed the Gripen E as a platform that offers modern situational awareness and a modular software backbone, while remaining cheaper to operate per flying hour than fifth-generation alternatives. Sensor architecture is where the two designs diverge sharply in operational doctrine. The F-35's architecture treats sensors as a fused system. Radar tracks, infrared imaging, electronic support measures, and external data are processed and combined, so the pilot sees a coherent battlespace picture and can pass that picture to other assets. The practical effect is that an F-35 can perform suppression of enemy air defences, SEAD, precision strike and intelligence tasks while masking its presence through internal carriage and emission control practices. Saab's Gripen E offers modern sensors that can perform early warning, targeting, and passive detection, and the Raven ES-05 radar adds a wide field of regard. The aircraft also integrates IRST and an advanced electronic warfare system that allows the Gripen to contest modern sensor nets without relying on stealth shaping. In short, the F-35 emphasizes low observable entry plus fusion. The Gripen emphasizes agility, electronic countermeasures, and distributed situational awareness. Mission fits reflect those technical choices. If the mission set demands strike deep into heavily defended airspace, where early detection is punished, the F-35's stealth and internal carriage give it clear doctrinal advantages. The jet is designed to be a networked node for coalition tasking, carrying advanced air-to-ground munitions and integrating into joint targeting networks, roles that the US military and many partner air forces have explicitly built around the platform. The Gripen E, by design, is a multi-role fighter that can handle air policing, interception, limited strike, and coalition operations, and it can be deployed from short or damaged runways. For countries that emphasize quick reaction alert, dispersed basing, and budgetary predictability, Gripen's operating concept can be preferable. In practical terms for Canada, whose priorities include Arctic intercepts, patrols, and NORAD integration, both aircraft can perform the intercept mission set. How they do it, via stealth sensors and networked ISR in the F-35, or via cost-effective presence, rapid sortie generation, and electronic warfare with the Gripen, is the core technical trade. Range and endurance are often repeated as blunt numbers in public debate, but context matters. The F-35's listed combat radius and internal fuel capacity produce excellent mission endurance for a stealth platform conducting multi-role sorties. Those figures are widely reported by the F-35 Program Office and Allied Air Forces. The Gripen E's internal fuel, plus the option for external tanks, gives it a competitive combat radius for regional tasks. Saab and third-party technical analyses cite figures in the neighbourhood of 1,300 kilometres under certain loadouts. The practical implication for operations in Canada's north is that Gripen's option to use external tanks, combined with efficient crews and rapid rearming, can yield mission persistence that rivals or exceeds internal fuel stealth missions in some profiles, particularly when the air defence threat is low or when the mission prioritises visible presence rather than low observability. That said, the stealth-based mission profile of the F-35 can reduce transit drag from enemy sensors and change the calculus for long-range strike and ISR in contested environments. Lifecycle cost and sustainment behaviour create another major technical operational distinction. Recent US Government Accounting Office reporting and Congressional Budget Office analysis show that F-35 sustainment costs and availability have been significant program drivers.
The new GAO report says the services will collectively be confronted with tens of billions of dollars in sustainment costs.
GAO reported a large increase in sustainment cost estimates between 2018 and 2023 and noted falling fleet availability in recent years. The F-35's sustainment model is global and complex. Software upgrades, supply chain deliveries, and depot-level repairs all matter, and program sustainment funds dominate long-term life cycle estimates. By contrast, Saab and several independent analysts have argued that Gripen's operating cost per flight hour is substantially lower, partly because of its single-engine design, mature supply chain for field repairs, and a design optimized for quick turnarounds and dispersed logistic footprints. Those cost differentials are central to procurement arguments because procurement ministers do not buy aircraft alone. They buy a multi-decadal sustainment commitment. Cold weather and Arctic suitability is a practical test for Canadian requirements. Sweden designed the original Gripen concept, with operations from northern bases.
We designed the system for is actually to be able to withstand the extreme max in terms of cold.
And short road strips in mind. And Saab runs climatic test campaigns that include extreme cold exposures and winter operating trials. Gripen's operating concept, rapid servicing, ability to operate from forward or dispersed sites, and easy engine access for replacement in field conditions, maps directly onto the kinds of dispersed Arctic operations Canada may need. The F-35 program has also undertaken climatic and icing tests at laboratories such as the McKinley Climatic Laboratory to certify operations in extreme environments, and Lockheed Martin and program offices have published material noting cold weather testing. However, questions about specific component behaviour in extreme cold and certain sensor vulnerabilities have surfaced in reporting and program reviews. Those issues typically focus on particular subsystems and have led to mitigation work within the program. The empirical record therefore shows both aircraft have been tested for cold climates, yet the Gripen's design lineage and Swedish operating experience offer an operational narrative that highlights Arctic-centric basing and rapid field servicing. The integration and upgrade pathway matters too. The F-35 has a formal, coordinated block upgrade path managed across partner nations, delivering new weapons, enhanced sensors, and connectivity upgrades on a scheduled roadmap. That centralized upgrade model enforces common standards across coalition users, but also ties upgrades to a multinational program office and export control regimes. Saab's Gripen architecture emphasizes a modular, software-centric mission system where national customers can negotiate local development, maintenance, and technology transfer, a design choice that eases independent upgrade decisions and local industrial participation. The trade is clear. The F-35's centralized development delivers a cohesive, multinational capability set. The Gripen's modular approach delivers greater national control and potentially faster local innovation for buyers that invest in domestic engineering partnerships. Canada-US security relationship and NORAD interoperability.
The United States and Canada announced an agreement to create the North American Air Defense Command, also known as NORAD.
Canada and the United States do continental air defense together. That blunt fact sits at the center of every serious argument about which fighter Ottawa should buy. NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, is a binational structure created to watch and protect the continent. It was formalized in 1958 and from the start specified a shared command relationship. The NORAD commander is an American officer and the deputy commander is Canadian. This is not ceremonial. It means Canadian air power routinely plugs into a US command and control system and mission cycle that depends on common situational awareness, predictable logistics, and the ability to task aircraft and sensors across borders in minutes. Any change in Canada's fleet, therefore, has real operational consequences for how NORAD will field forces in crises. When Ottawa framed its fighter decision in public statements, NORAD became the shorthand for those operational consequences. In Ottawa's public materials on the Future Fighter Capability Project, the government explicitly tied the new fleet to Canada's obligations to both NORAD and NATO, saying a modern fighter jet fleet is essential for defending Canada and Canadian sovereignty, and to meet international commitments. Minister statements around the 2023 confirmation of the F-35 repeatedly referenced NORAD obligations and the need to operate seamlessly with US partners in the Arctic and over North America. That political framing matters. Politicians and senior military planners treat interoperability with the United States as something that can be measured and weighed alongside price and industrial benefits. What do people mean by interoperability in this context? At the practical level, it means three linked things. First, secure and timely exchange of sensor and targeting data in real time, so that an aircraft can hand off a track to another platform or cue ground-based shooters without losing time or accuracy. Second, logistics and sustainment compatibility, spare parts, training, and maintenance pipelines that allow deployed forces to be supported wherever they operate. Third, doctrine and command and control fit, standardized procedures and software that let allied fighters operate inside the same mission sets without bespoke workarounds. The F-35 program is often presented by US and allied supporters as an interoperability fulcrum because the aircraft was built from the ground up to share fused sensor data, to act as a distributed sensor node, and to operate inside a coordinated upgrade path shared by many partners. Those features are not just technical bragging points. They are the reasons defense planners say the jet multiplies allied effectiveness in high-threat environments. That technical side has clear operational consequences for NORAD. The F-35's sensor fusion and the Multifunction Advanced Data Link, MADL, allow F-35s to exchange high-volume, low-probability of intercept data with one another while conducting missions where emissions would otherwise reveal them. MADL supplements legacy data links, like Link 16, that older fighters and many NATO assets still rely on. Link 16 remains the universal baseline, but it is slower and less stealthy than MADL for high-threat fights. In NORAD tasks that are permissive, intercepting an incursion in peacetime, Link 16 and older aircraft perform fine, but for scenarios that involve contested Arctic approaches or operations against advanced integrated air defense networks, the combination of MADL data sharing, onboard fusion, and stealth makes a difference in how commanders will plan missions and which assets they trust to enter contested airspace. In short, interoperability in the F-35 sense is not abstract. It changes how coalition commanders can distribute risk across aircraft and sensors. The United States has made those operational consequences part of its diplomatic posture. In public reporting and analysis, US officials and Allied analysts have warned that diverging from the F-35 standard complicates coalition planning and can reduce Allied effectiveness in integrated operations. That message has surfaced in media coverage of Canada's procurement debate. When Ottawa paused or reviewed F-35 purchases, it frequently drew public comment from US interlocutors, noting that common platforms simplify logistics, information sharing, and contingency planning. Those warnings are not only rhetorical. When a country buys one type of aircraft while most partners buy another, the operational seams widen. Software integration must be built around gateways, spare part contracts fragment, and classified upgrade paths can be harder to manage. Those seams require time and money to bridge. Two things procurement ministers do not like to underestimate. But interoperability is not only a story of technological fit, it is a political and legal architecture. NORAD is a treaty-based, binational arrangement with standing procedures that assume a continuous North American air picture produced by sensors and fighters from both countries. Canada's basing, alert posture, and the RCAF's ability to take direction from NORAD headquarters in Colorado Springs or regional NORAD centers depend on aircraft that can be tasked and supported under those procedures.
Of all the billions of dollars Canada spends on military equipment, 75% of it goes to suppliers in the United States.
When the Canadian government says it needs a fleet that can meet its military obligations at home, it refers to the everyday realities of NORAD. Fast reaction alerts, FRAs, sovereignty patrols over the Arctic approaches, and integrated analyses of air tracks that can cross from Canadian airspace into US zones within minutes. A change in platform therefore affects hangar layouts, pilot training pipelines, and the technical interfaces used in continental defence planning. Those operational and political pressures are balanced in Ottawa's mind against two counter-arguments that supporters of alternative aircraft raise. First, interoperability does not require identical airframes in every case. The Gripen E and other advanced non-F-35 platforms can operate with NATO assets and pass data using Link 16 and other gateways. Gripen's proponents argue that modern gateways, national mission system adaptations, and focused training can deliver sufficient operational fit for the NORAD mission set, especially in peacetime or low-threat scenarios like Arctic intercepts. Second, there is a question of sovereignty and control. Some Canadian officials and analysts worry that buying a US-centric platform ties Canada's upgrade path and certain classified capabilities to decisions taken outside Ottawa. Those concerns animated public debates in 2012 and again in later procurement cycles. Both points are factual and matter operationally. Interoperability through common platforms is easier and cleaner. Interoperability through cross-graded systems is possible, but requires policy work on data access, sustained funding for gateways, and clear legal agreements about classified software. The F-35 program itself has practical issues that complicate the pure interoperability argument. US oversight reports from the Government Accountability Office have documented expanding sustainment cost estimates and availability challenges in the F-35 fleet. For example, GAO reported that projected sustainment costs rose from about $1.1 trillion in 2018 to roughly $1.58 trillion in 2023, while availability metrics did not meet program goals. Those are not political talking points. They are program realities that Allied planners must consider when they promise to rely on the fleet for coalition operations. If Canada buys into a platform whose sustainment profile continues to be a pressure point, Ottawa must budget for sustainment and account for potential availability shortfalls during the transition. That pragmatism, not ideology, is what procurement planners put under a microscope. The diplomatic side has a visibility problem. US officials and F-35 program representatives have publicly tried to reassure partners that there is no kill switch or arbitrary control mechanism that the United States could use to incapacitate Allied F-35s. And the Joint Program Office has repeatedly affirmed partner access to necessary capabilities. Those public reassurances have been necessary because questions about access to software, updates, satellite communications, and classified mission data surfaced during times of political tension between allies. The net effect is this: interoperability is as much a question about trust and governance as it is about radio waves and spare parts. allies must be confident about access to upgrades and support in times of crisis. Without that confidence, even a technically compatible fleet can feel operationally fragile. Canada's shifting geopolitical policy and defence diplomacy. Canada's fighter choice sits inside a larger change in how Ottawa sees itself on the world stage. Over the past 5 years, Canada has moved from a posture that treated the United States as the default partner for virtually everything defence-related, toward a more varied set of relationships that includes the European Union, Nordic states, and new industrial partners. That shift is practical and political. It reshapes what Ottawa values in a fighter purchase. Not only which jet will fly better in the Arctic, but which supplier will broaden Canada's defence ties, create local industry, and back Canadian foreign policy goals. The short version is this: Canada no longer talks only about interoperability with Washington. It also talks about access to European markets, shared Arctic know-how with Nordic allies, and building a sovereign industrial base. The most visible sign of that change is formal cooperation with the European Union. On 23 June 2025, Canada and the EU signed a security and defence partnership designed to frame bilateral work across the full security and defence spectrum. Ottawa's signatories included Foreign Affairs Minister Anita Anand and Defence Minister David J. McGuinty. On the EU side, the agreement was signed by High Representative Kaja Kallas. That document puts Canada into a structured dialogue with EU members on capability projects, defence industry cooperation, and crisis management planning under a single political framework. For the fighter debate, this matters, because it makes offers from European suppliers not only business pitches, but exercises in foreign policy. A Swedish or European industrial deal comes with deeper political links to a bloc that now treats Canada as a formal partner. Canada's earlier steps into European cooperation were pragmatic precursors. Ottawa has participated as a third state in EU projects such as military mobility and logistics hubs since 2021. Those early ties lowered the political friction for deeper defence partnership and signalled that Canada wanted ways to plug into European supply chains and exercises without being an EU member state. Joining EU initiatives gave Canadian planners access to exercises, procurement conversations, and industrial networks across the continent, access that a purely US-focused procurement would not provide. In short, Canada has built the institutional plumbing that turns a European fighter offer into an actionable industrial and operational opportunity. Nordic and Nordic-adjacent relationships sharpen the operational case. Finland and Sweden's accession to NATO, Finland in April 2023 and Sweden in 2024, brought northern expertise into the alliance and created new routes for Canada to cooperate on Arctic operations. Canada ratified both accessions and has since expanded bilateral work with Helsinki and Stockholm on Arctic security and cold weather operations. The militaries that trained for cold winters and operating from dispersed strips have practical lessons for Canada's own Arctic posture. For Ottawa, a Gripen offer backed by Sweden carries not just an aircraft, but access to years of Nordic experience in operating in harsh climates, and to industrial links that can be converted into Canadian jobs and maintenance hubs. That combination of operational know-how and industrial promise is what makes the European option more than a different airframe. It ties capability to immediate Arctic-relevant experience. Industrial politics matters because Canada's procurement rules and political expectations now treat defence buys as tools for industrial policy. Recent Canadian defence planning documents and budget lines created after the 2024 review stress the dual objectives of capability and domestic industrial benefit. Ottawa now expects bidders to outline concrete technology transfers, local production, and long-term supply links that will benefit Canadian firms. Saab's offers, public and reported, to build Gripen jets or GlobalEye platforms in Canada with Bombardier and other local partners are framed to match that demand. Saab and Swedish officials have publicly proposed significant job creation and local assembly as part of their bid, and those specific promises force a government that wants domestic jobs to evaluate industrial outcomes alongside technical trade-offs. In other words, a Gripen deal is evaluated not only as a defence choice, but as a national industry development plan. Those European and Nordic ties are not a rejection of the United States, but a recalibration. Canada's NORAD relationship and shared continental responsibilities with the United States remain core elements of national defence. What has changed is Ottawa's appetite to broaden the number of partners it can rely on for manufacturing, sustainment, and political backing. Joining EU defence frameworks and deepening ties with Sweden and Finland reduces the risk that one single supplier or one single political relationship will dictate Canada's future options. It gives Ottawa alternatives when US domestic law, export controls, or procurement preferences create friction for Canadian industry. That hedging logic has practical roots. Recent trade and tariff frictions across many sectors have shown how supply chains can be disrupted by national policy choices, and defence procurement is no exception. The diplomatic choreography has political dimensions inside Canada. Domestic actors from provincial governments, union leaders, and aerospace firms press Ottawa to maximise local industrial content. Ministers and MPs respond to visible job offers, and Swedish public diplomacy has recently made those offers explicit. Reports in November 2025 showed Saab in talks with Bombardier and Canadian officials about licensed production that could create thousands of jobs. Those announcements shift the debate from abstract strategic alignment to a concrete win for regional economies, particularly Quebec and other aerospace hubs. When a supplier promises local assembly lines, training programs, and export opportunities, it changes the incentives facing Canadian decision-makers who must balance jobs, defence capability, and fiscal constraints. At the same time, Ottawa faces trade-offs that go beyond industry. Leaning into European defence ties means accepting new interoperability tasks, integrating non-US systems into a continent where the US remains the main defence architect requires extra work on software gateways, data sharing agreements, and secure supply channels. Those steps are achievable, but they require budget and diplomatic bandwidth. Canada must negotiate access to classified mission data, define maintenance partnerships, and set legal terms for long-term upgrades. Those negotiations are not invisible technicalities. They are diplomatic deals that have to be struck and sustained over decades. The new security and defence partnership with the EU gives Ottawa a forum to do that work at scale, but the results will depend on firm-level contracts and long-term political trust between Ottawa and its new partners. Economic and industrial considerations in the fighter decision, money and industrial policy are as decisive as range and radar in any major fighter purchase. For Ottawa, the problem is simple to state and hard to resolve. Buying new fighters is also buying decades of maintenance contracts, training pipelines, parts supply chains, and skilled jobs located in specific provinces and towns. The F-35 purchase, announced in 2023, commits Canada to 88 aircraft with a projected procurement bill in the mid-tens of billions and a life cycle cost that Ottawa and independent analysts have placed in the tens of billions of dollars over decades. Those headline figures matter politically because they translate immediately into promises about jobs, industrial offsets, and regional economic benefits. Canada's procurement rules make those economic stakes formal. Under the Industrial and Technological Benefits (ITB) policy, any bidder on a major defence contract must submit a value proposition that describes specific business activity in Canada equal to the value of the contract. In practice, the ITB framework turns defence procurement into an industrial policy instrument. The winning contractor must produce measurable investments, technology transfers, supplier development and training in Canadian firms and communities. That policy requirement is the main reason industrial packages from Lockheed Martin and from Saab are not side offers. They are central to whether a bid meets Ottawa's legal and political criteria. That institutional demand explains why Saab's offer has been framed as more than a price per aircraft. Saab and its Swedish backers have publicly pitched the Gripen option as a path to local production and large employment gains. Swedish and Canadian media have reported ongoing talks between Saab and Bombardier about licensed production in Canada, and Saab officials have, at various points, put the potential Canadian employment figure in the thousands. Public reports have cited figures such as 10,000 jobs as possible if assembly and sustainment were built in Canada. Those numbers are potent political currency. They map onto provincial priorities in Quebec, Ontario, and in aerospace clusters, where unions and local governments lobby hard for contracts that create long-term, high-skilled manufacturing work. Lockheed Martin's offering is structurally different. The F-35 program rests on a vast global supply chain and existing industrial partnerships. Lockheed and the F-35 enterprise can point to a large economic footprint, suppliers in dozens of US states, and multiple partner countries participate in the program, and the global program claims significant annual economic flows into the American economy and large numbers of supplier jobs. For Canada, Lockheed's value proposition typically emphasizes supply chain participation for Canadian firms, sustainment contracts, pilot and maintainer training packages, and integration into existing North American logistics networks. The argument from Lockheed and from many defense planners is that the continuity of work with US suppliers and existing NORAD ties produces immediate efficiencies and predictable long-term contracts for Canadian companies that already work in American defense supply chains. Comparing these two models reveals a few concrete trade-offs. Saab's pitch is local first, assembly lines, transfer of intellectual property, and the creation of a sustainment hub in Canada that would keep value and engineering capability on Canadian soil. Those features meet the headline demands of ITB: guaranteed local business activity, skills development, and supply chain growth. Lockheed's model is networked. Canada's industry would be woven into a multinational supply chain where Canadian firms could win high-value subcontracts but might not control final assembly or sovereign sustainment decisions. The practical difference is simple. In one scenario, the capability remains dispersed across many partners with shared upgrades and centralized program governance. In the other scenario, Canada would aim to own a larger slice of the technical ladder from assembly through sustainment. Both models have political advocates inside Ottawa and in provincial capitals. Jobs are the headline, but the quality and permanence of work matter even more. Saab's public materials and some media reporting stress long-term manufacturing jobs tied to licensed production, as well as engineering and research positions. Lockheed's proposals, while promising supplier work and training, tend to create roles that are embedded in a multinational network where prime decisions remain with the program office or the manufacturer. From a federal political point of view, those differences shape whether a contract is sold as a national industrial victory, local assembly, and guaranteed lines of work, or as integration into a continental industrial cluster, supply chain contracts and cross-border opportunities. Provincial actors, trade unions, and local economic development agencies typically prefer the first model because it produces visible factories and tax base. Federal planners may value the second model for its access to a proven sustainment ecosystem. Cost and life cycle calculations cut across both offers and complicate promises about jobs. The operational and sustainment cost picture for the F-35 has been the subject of repeated program oversight and public scrutiny. Independent audits and parliamentary reviews have focused attention on long-term sustainment budgets and on the gap between flyaway price and ownership costs over 40 years. These life cycle numbers matter because a lower per-hour operating cost for a competitor like Gripen can free budget headroom for local industrial investment or domestic infrastructure. Conversely, higher sustainment obligations for a fifth-generation fleet mean long-term payments to global supply and maintenance networks. When finance ministers and defense officials do the math, they rarely focus on aircraft cost alone. They focus on the envelope of people, parts, software, and depot investment required to keep a fleet ready for decades. That arithmetic explains why industrial offers that promise immediate job creation can sometimes be offset by projected sustainment burdens that distort the net economic benefit over time. Another axis is technology transfer and sovereign control. The ITB policy requires activity in Canada, but it does not automatically grant full access to classified mission software or to certain controlled subsystems. Saab's pitch often highlights technology transfer, the ability for Canadian engineers to work on mission systems and for Canada to host upgrades. Lockheed's industrial offer typically emphasizes integration into the F-35 program's common upgrade path, which is controlled by an international program office, with complex rules about classification and change control. For policymakers who prioritize sovereign capacity to retrofit and upgrade jet systems independently, the degree of transferability of software, source code, and sustainment know-how is decisive. That question lies at the heart of debates about whether Canada can truly build an independent aerospace capability or will remain dependent on program partners for major software and systems updates. Supply chain resilience and geopolitical risk are practical considerations that shape how industrial benefits are tallied. The post-pandemic focus on secure supply lines has pushed governments to prefer local or allied suppliers for critical components. A Gripen-centered industrial plan that localizes production reduces the number of border crossings for critical parts and creates redundant domestic capacity for repairs and upgrades. A Lockheed-centric plan, in contrast, leverages a broader allied industrial base and the economies of scale of an existing global program, but requires robust contingency planning to manage export controls, tariffs, and political disputes that could constrain timely deliveries. Recent trade tensions and tariff disputes across sectors have reminded procurement planners that a supply chain is not just an economic structure, but also a political one that can be affected by diplomatic shifts. The politics of distribution is important in this matter. Ottawa must thread the needle between national objectives and regional politics. Quebec's aerospace cluster, Ontario's manufacturing capacity, and Atlantic Canada's supply chain niches all expect a share of the economic pie. Saab's overtures to partner with Bombardier and to locate assembly and sustainment in Canada are targeted at those domestic expectations. Lockheed's supply chain proposition is less likely to produce a single large final assembly facility in Canada, but it can flood the market with subcontract opportunities across provinces. How the government weighs visible assembly jobs against distributed supplier contracts will shape the electoral narrative around the procurement and, ultimately, the choice itself. National sovereignty, control, and technology dependency. The fighter jet debate in Canada is also a debate about control. Who keeps the keys to core defence technology? Who decides when upgrades or fixes happen? And how much of a country's military fate rests in foreign hands? On paper, this looks like a technical argument about software, mission data files, and export licenses. In practice, it is a political calculation about whether Ottawa wants to accept operational dependence on another capital's industrial and legal system, or to invest in a platform and industrial base that gives Canada more direct control over upgrades, sustainment, and classified data. That difference explains why questions about who owns the code and where mission data is processed became decisive political themes in Canada's public debate. The starting point is the modern fighter's reliance on software. The F-35 is as much a flying computer as it is an airframe. Its mission systems, sensor fusion, threat libraries, and electronic warfare mapping are continually updated through program-managed software releases. Some allies have flagged two linked concerns about that centralized model. First, the program's upgrade and data pipelines are run through an international program office with strong US influence, which means host nations must accept shared procedures for classified mission data handling and scheduled software blocks. Second, because key mission data processing and certain support functions happen in US-based systems or under US control, allies fear that political decisions in Washington could, in theory, influence the timing or availability of critical updates. Those governance realities are why commentators across Europe and North America debated the idea of a US kill switch in 2025, a phrase that captures political anxiety even if program officials say the literal concept is a myth. The practical point is not whether a remote off switch exists, it is that complex, centrally managed software regimes create dependency vectors that a buyer country must accept or mitigate. Dependency takes multiple forms. The first is legal. Export control regimes like ITAR, the International Traffic in Arms Regulations, and US government contract clauses can restrict access to detailed design data, source code, and classified mission files. Even when a foreign firm participates in a joint program, there are layers of approvals and waivers that govern what a partner nation's engineers can see or modify. For Canada, which wants both capability and sovereign control, the legal limits on access to controlled data become a strategic cost. If core systems are only modifiable under US release processes, Ottawa's ability to make rapid national changes in response to new threats is constrained. Global affairs. Canada's export control framework and the long, careful negotiation that accompanies multinational programs underline how hard it can be to translate a procurement contract into full technical independence. A second dependency is operational. Mission data files and threat libraries. Analysts and program reports in 2024 to 2025 repeatedly noted that a significant portion of the F-35's electronic warfare and mission planning data flows through US-based processing and secure cloud services. Experts argue that this design offers advantages, a single curated dataset across coalition users, but also creates a point where access to the freshest, most relevant mission data can become subject to multinational approval and US policy. That is why some NATO capitals and commentators publicly worried that diplomatic disagreements with Washington might affect timely access to mission data or to software patches needed to keep jets fully functional in a given theatre. Those worries were amplified by media reporting on contract clauses and by public debate after political shifts in Washington raised questions about continuity of support. The operational effect is concrete. If a government cannot guarantee timely access to mission-critical updates, the combat readiness of its fleet becomes harder to assure on a purely national timeline. An alternative model, the one Saab emphasizes with the Gripen E, rests on open architecture and national control of mission systems. Saab pitches Gripen's modular software backbone as easier for customers to host, modify, and upgrade domestically, and it explicitly pairs that pitch with offers of technology transfer and licensed assembly in Canada. Saab's public material has used concrete job and transfer numbers in its Canadian campaign. The company's Built for Canada framework claims thousands of direct jobs and 100% guaranteed offsets, while media reports have cited talks with Bombardier and estimates of up to 10,000 potential jobs if licensed production and GlobalEye partnerships are included. Those numeric claims are politically influential. They translate sovereignty rhetoric into factories and paychecks located inside Canadian communities. But they also carry their own caveats. Technology transfer is rarely absolute, and the scope of access to sensitive elements, for example, certain classified EW algorithms or cryptographic modules, still depends on negotiated export agreements and technical sharing arrangements. The distinction between integration and sovereign control shows up in how upgrades happen. With the F-35, upgrades follow a coordinated block schedule, Block 4 and subsequent increments, that is planned through a multinational upgrade roadmap. This gives Allied fleets common capability baselines, useful for coalition planning, but it also means individual nations accept a governed process for feature requests and timeline changes. By contrast, a Gripen buyer that secures the necessary IP can undertake national bespoke changes on its own timetable. Canada could, in theory, task domestic firms to adapt sensors, integrate Canadian munitions, or develop tailored mission software without the same level of multinational program governance. That autonomy has appeal. It shortens the lag between a national requirement and a fielded change. The trade-off is that independent upgrades can reduce cross-partner commonality and may increase the cost of integrating national modifications into coalition operations. Sovereignty debates are not just technical, they are legal and diplomatic. The 2010 Auditor General's report and subsequent parliamentary scrutiny taught Ottawa two lessons. First, procurement must meet public and parliamentary rules. Second, Canadians care about who holds critical program levers. That public scrutiny heightened sensitivity around legal clauses in international contracts that could allow another government to restrict exports of parts or software, or to limit where an aircraft could be flown in extraordinary circumstances. Media reporting in 2025 about clauses in Allied contracts and about the political fallout when those clauses became public made the abstract risk tangible for Canadian voters and politicians. In other words, a sovereignty claim framed as "we must control our jets" plays well politically because it maps to real contractual and legal instruments that already shape Allied procurement. Practical mitigation measures exist, and they shape real policy options. Canada can negotiate stronger program protection agreements, secure bilateral data sharing accords that harden timely access, and invest in domestic sustainment and data processing capabilities so that mission-critical functions can be mirrored locally. Some allies have pursued hybrid approaches. They buy the F-35 for its coalition benefits, while simultaneously building national centres for mission data processing and contributing engineers to the multinational program offices to secure a greater voice in upgrade paths. Others insist on a higher share of domestic assembly and software access, accepting lower alignment on certain coalition standards in exchange for greater national control. Each option has costs. Local duplication of capability can be expensive. Over-reliance on multinational support can leave a country exposed during political disputes. Ottawa's choice is therefore a trade between operational ease with partners and long-term technical independence. Alliance politics, NATO, EU, and power balancing. The fighter debate speaks louder than aircraft specs. It sends a message about where Canada stands with its allies, which partnerships it values most, and how Ottawa plans to share burden and influence in future crises. Buying the F-35 signals deep integration with the United States and the broader F-35 coalition. Choosing the Gripen signals a stronger tilt toward European industrial partners and a bid for more independent capability. Both messages matter to allies, and to Canada's role inside NATO, the EU's emerging defence structures, and bilateral relations with Washington and Stockholm. Canada's 2023 commitment to buy 88 F-35s is the clearest single datum in this story. Ottawa signed an agreement to acquire 88 aircraft at an estimated procurement price of roughly 19 billion Canadian dollars, with total lifecycle costs reported to be far higher over decades. That purchase places Canada inside the F-35 global enterprise and signals to the United States and other F-35 partners that Canada intends to be part of the shared sensor fusion network that underwrites coalition air operations. For allies, this reduces friction in planning and logistics. Common aircraft lowers the number of ad hoc technical fixes needed in joint operations. For the US, Canada's choice is a vote for the status quo of North American defence integration. For European suppliers, it closes off one major market, but sharpens the political stakes of future offers. That global context matters because of how NATO organises its combat power. The F-35 is now fielded by many NATO members, making it a de facto standard in a growing number of high-end coalition formations. A plane that shares the F-35's data links and mission software becomes a more plug-and-play asset for NATO task groups designed to operate in contested airspace. When planners in NATO build an air tasking order that expects a common baseline of sensor fusion, nations that fly variant platforms must either accept integration overhead or face limits on which missions they can credibly offer. In practical terms, a non-F-35 Canada would still contribute strongly to alliance needs: maritime patrol, transport, cyber and logistics. But it might be asked less often to lead or join certain high-threat air operations, where the F-35's stealth and fused picture are considered decisive. That is not a question of loyalty, it is a question of which missions Canada wants to be cited for in alliance planning. The EU-Canada Security and Defence Partnership signed in June 2025 changes the diplomatic math. That agreement opened a structured channel for capability cooperation, industrial collaboration, and joint procurement discussion between Canada and the European Union. For Ottawa, the partnership creates a formal route by which purchases from European firms, Saab among them, can be framed not as bilateral commercial deals, but as strategic ties with an entire bloc. This matters politically because a Gripen deal, backed by an EU-Canada defence framework, becomes leverage. It ties Canadian purchases to access to European programs, supports, and industrial programs that promise jobs and joint projects across multiple countries. For European capitals, winning Canada as a reliable industrial partner strengthens their case for deeper transatlantic defence trade and expands the industrial base that can sustain future European projects. Choosing the F-35 or the Gripen also sends a signal about burden sharing and visibility in alliance politics. A Canada with F-35s is visibly aligned with US high-end strike and ISR architectures. That can make Canada a go-to partner for integrated air campaigns and for NORAD missions built around common procedures and equipment. The cost of that alignment is higher long-term sustainment budgets and a greater share of dependency on a multinational program office for upgrades and mission data. A Canada that chooses Gripen is signalling that it wants strong cooperation with Europe and the Nordic partners, and that it values the industrial returns gained from a local or European supply chain. That signal matters in alliance bargaining. European states may reward Canada with easier access to joint exercises, procurement projects, or political backing in multilateral fora. Washington may raise operational questions about data sharing and integration in the highest threat mission sets. Both responses affect Canada's leverage when it negotiates force posture or seeks to shape alliance priorities. Alliance politics also plays out in the practical domain of interoperability policy and classified access. Nations that buy the F-35 are folded into a shared upgrade roadmap and a managed mission data environment. That common roadmap reduces technical friction, but concentrates control over key software and cryptographic elements in a multinational governance body where the United States is dominant. For some allies, this is acceptable because it buys operational cohesion. For others, it raises concerns about national control over sensitive systems. A Gripen buyer that secures real technology transfer and control over mission systems will face a different set of negotiations. It must ensure that gateway systems, data share protocols, and secure links to NATO and the US are robust while preserving the right to modify systems domestically. These legal and technical trade-offs are bargaining chips in alliance talks. They affect who Canada can partner with on the most demanding missions and how quickly it can respond to on-the-ground needs during a crisis. Big powers will read the decision as well. The United States views common platforms as a way to reduce friction and increase predictability in coalition campaigns. When a close partner like Canada confirms an F-35 purchase, Washington frames it as strengthening the integrated defense posture of North America and NATO. If you found this breakdown helpful, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss future updates. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Should Canada go with the Gripen or the F-35? Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.